Hey everyone, how's it going? So now we added an error message when we try to access a page of a user that doesn't exist. So what we'll do now is something real quick. We'll make it so that you can access a user by their ID as well. So maybe further down the line we write some code in which we only have the user's ID, and we don't want to have to go and retrieve the username before we can create the link. So being able to access a page by the ID as well is just a nice little trick we can do. So if I go back to our where are we? Profile roots.js. Inside of this if statement is where the user wasn't found. So we tried to find a user by the username and we didn't find them. So what we can do instead is just take this line right here and then what we'll do is above that return statement, I'm going to paste that in there. And then I'll just do a search by the user's ID. So instead of doing find one, we're going to search for find by ID. And it's not going to be this object in there. All we're going to do is just pass in the username like that. Alright. So this will then do a search by the ID instead. So essentially we're saying try and find the user by username. If we don't find a user with that username, try with the ID instead. Maybe they've maybe it's an ID and not a username. So then we look for that here. And then we can just do one more check on this one to see if we did find a user. So all we'll do is wrap this return statement inside an if block. We'll say if user equals null, like that, and paste that in there. Okay, so at this point, if a user is not null, it won't return here and it will just continue to here. And I just realized we've used var there again. We don't need var because we already have var here. So we don't need to declare the variable again. We can just use the variable that we already declared up here. So get rid of the var in front of that. Okay, so we try and find by username. If we can't find it, we try with the ID instead, using the username variable as an ID, I mean. And then if it's null, we return the user not found. If it's not null, we continue as normal. Okay, it means we did find one by ID. And that should be it. I think that's all we need. So I will start that again. And then I'll log in. And log in there. And I'll go and get a username of a user. So let me go to our users table. Just give it some time. And I'll take any of these IDs. Let's take this one here. Can I copy this? It's not letting me copy it. If I click on this pen, maybe will it let me copy it that way? Okay, so I clicked on the pen right here, and it allowed me to then copy this. So I've copied that ID, and I'll go back to this tab here, and I'll go to this profile, but then I'll type in an ID instead, like that, and it works. It's sent us to our profile. Now, just to make sure it worked, I can then change this to an ID which doesn't exist. So I'll change this last letter right here to something else, maybe a lowercase d, and then we see that error message. Okay. All right. So now we can access the user's profile by ID or by username.